That my first involvements with people who have intellectual disabilities was when I worked at one of the big bad old institutions, the one in Belchertown, Massachusetts. And I worked there for 10 years, starting in direct service roles, and I got to be a low-level bureaucrat. Interestingly, that when I was there, that this fella, Richard is his name, who he lived there, and somehow, even though he has a great deal of trouble in speaking, and others like me have trouble in understanding, somehow he got me recruited to walk across the street from the state school with him once a month or so to have lunch at a restaurant that's it's now become a Dunkin' Donuts. Then it was called the Red Pantry, and he started letting me buy him lunch once a month or so, and I'm leaving here at my house here today in about an hour to go and have lunch with him again. That we're both a little older than we were when we first met. So I guess that's one of my involvements. And somehow Richard recruited me when I wasn't even thinking about this idea that people need friends.
Mm-hmm.
When I no longer was assigned to work with him, I actually ended up getting a full-time job to become an employment specialist as well. But I knew that Tony was in my life for a reason, and I wanted to stay friends with him. And that's actually when opportunities for both of us to mean something to each other really opened up in a substantial way. I had the freedom to go see him on the weekends and the evenings and anytime I wanted, quite frankly, because I wasn't bound by the hours that I had to put in and all of that kind of thing. We would celebrate his birthday together. I would invite my friends to join, and then my friends became his friends. We started attending church together, and we would join prayer meetings together. We would sit together every Sunday morning at the Brooklyn Tabernacle, which is this big inner city church in downtown Brooklyn. And so we became true friends, and he really became like family to me. My family from Illinois had a chance to meet him, celebrated Thanksgiving a number of times when my family would come visit me. He really changed my perspective of my whole world. He allowed me to live a more unhurried life, especially in the fast-paced city. That was a gift to me, to be able to sit and be still. Despite the fact that the city is whizzing past both of us. I realize that there's much more to being human than climbing up the career ladder, so to speak. And I found a great sense of peace in my own life.
How things that can seem small to us can mean so much to other people, especially if they have very few connections in the world. So we have a match that was made during the beginning of the pandemic, and at first the advocate was having great difficulty getting in touch with their friend over the phone. But then the advocate got to know the house manager a little bit and got her email, and he's been sending really funny emails to this fellow about weekly. The fellow was getting a great kick out of these funny emails. It was kind of like the highlight of his week, and I kind of just had to support his friend advocate by saying that even though you aren't getting responses back, he's really getting a lot out of these emails. It's making his week. Even something that seems small to an outsider can be huge to the person on the other end. And I have one match that makes me think of where the woman has a severe disability in a lot of ways, but she always says to the advocate that, like, wow, you're here because you want to be here, because you like to be with me. You're not even being paid. So I just think that illustrates that even though some of the people who are friends can't communicate that clearly, people do know what's going on, and when the friendship is really heartfelt, and that's the reason. Once the friendship builds, and people realize that the reason why they are there is just because they want to be, it's very powerful.
So I went around and I started doing a series of talks, and one of the talks that I did was at the church that I attend, to the missions committee at that church. And so I was saying, like, this is a church, we should be reaching out to other people. And after the meeting, the pastor said to me, there's this fella at the nursing home, Lawrence is his name. And every time I go there to kind of do the in nursing home church service, he says, when are you going to get me a ride back to church on Sundays? So the pastor, Reverend Johnson, said to me, why don't you come over and meet Lawrence, and you can, start giving him a ride to church on Sundays.
Mm-hmm.
So I met Lawrence. It was quite, he was a bit of a character. He described himself as a roller skating man, as an athol man. He only made it through second grade. For a lot of years he worked. His description was he was the floor boss, which from what I learned from other people meant that he was a janitor in a furniture manufacturing place. Married and had a tremendously loyal relationship with his wife, where he would, she ended up getting quite ill at the end of her life, and he would walk like 3 or 4 miles every day one way. So it'd be 6 or 8 miles to visit her in the nursing home every day. He would do that. So he was certainly a loyal man and a hardworking man. He got in some trouble with the law caused by some kids, from what I understand. A judge sent him, the words I heard used was that he got remanded to the custody of the Department of Mental Health for the rest of his natural days. So he got sent away for a number of years. He ended up coming back to our local nursing home, which is where he was when I met him. He became part of our family. I have an essay here that was written by our youngest. When he was applying for colleges, you have to write your senior essay. And his senior essay was about the family's relationship with Lawrence. And it's, I think it begins something like, Lawrence had the pleasure of being a member of my family before I did, and Lawrence had come over to our house on Sundays after church, maybe once a month, and have beer and pancakes. That our hearts are a little bit more open as a church community because of Lawrence's presence with us for 20 years. We tend to talk a lot about physical accessibility, but Lawrence's presence and well-supported presence from us and from others at church as well, that helped our church to become a place that was socially accepting as well, and in a deep way, not just tolerating and not just seeing people as part of a group, but as an individual person.
But the cry for real friendship stuck out to me. It's like, if there's anything that I feel called to respond to, it would be this cry for real relationships. There was one man named Peter who came up to me and he said, hey, I'd like to meet somebody with a disability. And, of course, my ears and heart perked up, because it's like, that was what I was hoping for all along. I wanted to see that this was possible here. And so first person I thought of was let's go to Tony's group home and I'll introduce you to his roommates. And keep in mind that we're talking about somebody who's never had any experience going to a group home, meeting anybody with a disability, and you're trying to help them to see the kinds of experiences that people have, and yet help them to see eye to eye with these people so that they can see that it is possible to have a real relationship with them. And so I introduce him to Charlie and to John. Charlie has a very just warm-hearted, open personality, charismatic personality. Peter and Charlie get to talking for a while. And toward the end, as we wrap things up and saying goodbye, Charlie said, Peter, when am I going to see you next? I just kind of stood back and, I'm like, oh man, what's going on? And Charlie said, how about next week? And then Peter and Charlie became good friends. Charlie started attending church with Peter, and and meeting his family, going out to eat after church on Sunday, and meeting many more friends at church. So
it's about Dave and Tom. And Tom's a fella who's he's 30 years old. He has some intellectual disability, relatively mild, so he could speak and move around and basically take care of himself. He had some health problems, with a tracheotomy, had kidney troubles. His kidneys were just barely functioning. Maybe a guy 30, 35, somewhere's in there. And he was living with his dad, who was ailing, and he had everybody else in his life was women. His two passions in life, or two of his passions in life, were the river rat race, which is a canoe race from the town of Athol to the town of Orange. That happens on the second Saturday of April every year. And so the river rat race and NASCAR, the car racing business. So we met him and thought about how he's really could use somebody in his corner when something happened to his dad, as far as where he might move. That when he was involved with the medical system, that it'd be good if he had a friend and advocate with him who could make sure he got good care so that his life went as long as it could go. And that, but then, that they'd have some fun together too, and, looking for shared interests between the two. So then we're looking for somebody thinking who might be a good advocate. And we say, well, there's this fella, Dave, but really active in community affairs, running,
Yes.
going to meetings, helping stuff to happen, the Halloween hayride, anything like that, he was really involved in. And one of the things that he did, it was kind of one of the leaders in our local Lions Club. And he had coordinated the river rat race for a number of years and was still doing it at the time we asked him to be Tom's advocate. And he was really, he was our local Subaru dealer, right? So he was really into cars and really into NASCAR racing. So, approached Dave about getting involved with Tom. And, at first he was quite nervous about it, because he didn't know anything about being involved with a person who had a disability. But when you talk about shared interest in NASCAR and the river rat race, that kind of humanizes people. And then when you say to Dave, you don't have to do the operation, but making sure that the doctors treat him well, and maybe going to a couple meetings, and if they're looking for another place for him to live, to do what you can to keep him living here in the North Quabbin area, in these towns where he's lived all his life with his family. You can do that. You don't need to be a professional expert to do those things. And so he said, okay, I'll give it a try. They got involved with each other, and they got quite close. When Tom was moved to like a group home place as his health problems got worse in a town 30 minutes away, Dave continued to go and visit him regularly. Dave went to meetings. Tom ended up getting a kidney transplant. And I don't know what role Dave might have played in going to meetings about that, but he never denied that he might have said a few words, and he kind of knew everybody too, so just a request from somebody who's known and respected in the community can help make good things happen and stop bad things from happening. And they had good times. At one point, they were going to a NASCAR race out of state, and Tom wasn't doing very well health-wise. So Dave used his connections in the NASCAR world to make sure that they got good parking places, like right up close, so that Tom could get there and get into the stands without having to take a long walk. So it would work for him. So, little things like that, but, that kind of made life. It was a main source of joy and also of safety, of protection for Tom. At one point, I interviewed him, and Dave said was that getting involved with Tom was one of the best things he'd ever done. Of all the ways that he'd made gifts and contributions to other people and to kind of worthy events in our community, that he thought the idea that he and Tom had been involved with each other was just a really great thing for Tom, for Dave, and really for our community. If there had been no invitation, nothing would have happened. For Dave, it never would have occurred to him that he might get personally involved with a person who has a disability. But once it did occur to him, and he found out that like people are people and not just scary stereotypes, it was like, hey, this is great.
I believe so wholeheartedly that this is essential for people's lives to have freely given relationships motivated by love.
Just the power of being there. A lot of times, people with disabilities have mistreatments that you can't do much about to fix per se, but just being with somebody and showing that you care can be really, really powerful.